He was already walking toward the elevator with his family, and she was still holding the microphone, her engagement ring lying on the floor between them. The rooftop of the Manhattan Hotel had been silent for 10 seconds, but inside Brielle's head, the noise was deafening. Just moments ago, the air had been filled with polite laughter, clinking crystal, and the kind of expensive jazz that plays when rich people make business deals disguised as marriages. Now, the only sound was the wind whipping through the silk of her dress and the low, angry buzz of the feedback loop from the microphone she gripped like a weapon. Preston Vale, the man she was supposed to marry in 6 months, stopped near the glass doors. He didn't look heartbroken. He looked inconvenienced. His jaw was set in a hard line, the same expression he wore when a stock dropped 2 points. He looked at the 3-carat diamond sitting on the marble pavers like lost collateral, then back at her. He didn't move to pick it up. He didn't move to comfort her. He just turned his back, signaling to his security team to clear a path. Brielle stood frozen. Her chest heaved, pulling in the cold night air, but her lungs felt tight. 100 guests, her parents' friends, potential investors, socialites, stared at her. Their eyes were wide, hungry for the disaster unfolding in front of them. She could see them whispering behind champagne flutes, their gazes darting from her trembling figure to the tall, dark-haired man stepping into the private elevator across the terrace. Nolan. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His hand was on the small of another woman's back. A woman Brielle didn't know, but who looked at Nolan with a familiarity that made Brielle's stomach turn. Next to them stood a little girl, tugging on Nolan's jacket. The elevator doors began to slide shut. For a split second, before the steel closed, Brielle saw Nolan's eyes one last time. They weren't filled with the love she remembered. They were tired. They were final. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking so badly she almost dropped the mic. The adrenaline that had pushed her to speak was fading, leaving behind a cold, terrifying reality. She had just humiliated one of the most powerful families in New York. She had destroyed her parents' only safety net. Across the room, her mother's face was a mask of horror, her hand covering her mouth, while her father looked like he was mentally calculating the cost of the lawsuit Preston would surely file. But Brielle couldn't bring herself to care about the lawsuits or the scandal. She felt a strange, terrifying lightness, the heavy weight of being the perfect daughter, the perfect asset, the perfect fiancée. It had all shattered the moment that ring hit the floor. As the elevator indicator light pinged, signaling Nolan was gone, Brielle realized she had just set her entire life on fire. And as she stood alone in the center of the ashes, she realized she had absolutely no idea how to survive the burn. Tell me in the comments, was she wrong to blow up her engagement in public? Or would you have done the same? If you were in Brielle's shoes, would you have run after him immediately, or stayed to face the music? The first note felt like a ghost's hand on her throat, because no one alive should have known that melody. 5 minutes earlier, everything had been perfect. Or at least it looked perfect. Brielle was standing by the open bar, letting Preston keep his arm around her waist. His grip was tight, possessive, a constant reminder that she was part of the acquisition. He was talking to a hedge fund manager about risk mitigation, and Brielle was doing what she did best, smiling, nodding, and pretending she wasn't suffocating. Then the band stopped. The lead singer tapped his earpiece, looking annoyed. A feedback screech cut through the chatter. The keyboard player was frantically checking chords, shaking his head. The mood dipped. People started checking their watches. The host, desperate to keep the energy up, made a joke into the mic. Is there a pianist in the house? We seem to have a technical difficulty. It was a throwaway comment, meant to fill dead air. But then, a man stepped out from the shadows near the VIP section. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. He wore a suit that cost more than Brielle's car, but he didn't wear it like the other men here. He wore it like armor. He sat at the glossy black baby grand piano in the center of the terrace. The crowd murmured. Who was this guy? The staff whispered about a mystery investor from the West Coast, but nobody moved to stop him. Brielle took a sip of champagne, bored. Then he placed his hands on the keys. The first chord hit her like a physical blow. Her glass trembled in her fingers, champagne sloshing over the rim and onto her wrist. It wasn't a pop song. It wasn't jazz. It was a slow, haunting melody in a minor key, something raw and unfinished. It was The Moonlit Vow. Her breath hitched. She stared at the back of the pianist's head. The dark hair was cut shorter than she remembered, but the set of his shoulders was the same. She looked at his hands on the keys. The right hand was scarred, the skin slightly puckered from the knuckles to the wrist, moving stiffly but with undeniable power. Goosebumps erupted all over her skin. She remembered those hands. She remembered them smooth and young, guiding her own fingers over cheap plastic keys in a dusty community center basement. She remembered the night he wrote this song. He had whispered, "I'm never writing this down, Bree. It only exists when I play it for you." But he was dead. He was dead. They told her he was dead. Preston tightened his grip on her waist. Who is this clown? This is depressing. Brielle didn't hear him. Her body was reacting before her mind could catch up. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the city noise below. She felt the heat of a memory. A summer night, a stolen kiss, a promise that defied their empty bank accounts. The man at the piano turned his head slightly, just enough for the stage light to catch his profile. It was him. By the time he reached the final chorus, building the song to a crescendo that sounded like a scream trapped in a melody, Brielle knew two things with terrifying clarity. Nolan Hart was alive, and every promise she'd made to everyone else was about to break. If someone played a private love song from your past, one you thought was buried with the person who wrote it, would you keep quiet to keep the peace, or confront them on the spot? Do you think Nolan played the song to hurt her, or to wake her up? Her "I can't marry you" didn't just cut through the music. It cut through years of obedience in a single breath. The last note of the song hung in the air, vibrating against the glass railings of the rooftop. The crowd was silent, unsure if they should clap or look away. The raw emotion in the music was too intimate for a party like this. It felt like walking in on someone crying. Preston leaned down, his breath smelling of scotch. "Finally," he muttered. "Let's get the toast over with so we can leave." He tugged her toward the small stage where the microphone stand waited. Brielle's feet moved automatically, conditioned by years of following instructions. Step here, smile here, sign here. But her eyes were locked on the piano bench. The man was standing up now. He buttoned his jacket with that scarred hand. He looked at her. The look wasn't angry. It wasn't loving. It was a challenge. Preston handed her the microphone. "Thank everyone for coming, Brielle. Keep it short." She gripped the cold metal. She looked at the crowd. Hundreds of faces expecting a speech about gratitude and future mergers. She looked at her parents in the front row, beaming with relief that the deal was almost sealed. Then she looked at Preston. He was checking his phone, already mentally moved on to the next task. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was the quiet sound of a tether breaking. "I can't do this," she whispered. The microphone picked it up. Preston's head snapped up. "What?" Brielle's voice shook, but it got louder. "I can't do this. I can't marry you." A collective gasp swept through the rooftop. Someone dropped a glass, the shatter echoing like a gunshot. Preston's face went from bored to beet red in a second. He stepped closer, his voice a low hiss. "Brielle, stop it. You're drunk. Give me the mic." He reached for her, but she yanked her hand back. The movement was violent, sudden. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice ringing out over the speakers. She turned to the crowd, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. I thought love was a transaction. I thought I had to do what was safe." Tears blurred her vision. "But the only man I ever loved, the man I thought died 10 years ago, is standing right there." She pointed a shaking finger at the piano. Every head turned. Camera phones lifted into the air like a firing squad, flashes blinding her. Preston looked furious, his fists clenched at his sides. Her mother looked like she was about to faint. But Brielle felt a rush of intoxication she had never experienced with champagne. It was the wild, terrifying rush of the truth. She looked at Preston one last time. "I'm sorry," she said. Though she didn't feel sorry, she felt free. She pulled the diamond ring off her finger. Felt heavy like a shackle. She let it drop. Clatter. She didn't wait for his response. She ran toward the piano, her heels clicking on the stone. Ready for the reunion every romance movie had promised her. She was ready to crash into his arms. She was ready to be saved. But as she reached the piano, panting and desperate, the man at the bench didn't open his arms. He stepped back. "Have you ever said something in public you couldn't take back? Even though a part of you finally felt free? Tell me below. Was Brielle brave for doing this? Or cruel to do it in front of everyone?" She thought he was alone, waiting for her. She was wrong. He'd already built a whole life without her. Brielle stopped 3 feet away from him. Up close, the changes were brutal. The boyish softness of his face was gone, replaced by sharp angles and a shadow of stubble. A thin white scar ran through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were guarded, hard walls where there used to be open doors. "Nolan?" she breathed, reaching out. You're here." He didn't reach back. He looked past her, over her shoulder. "Daddy." The small voice came from behind the piano. Brielle froze. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, stepped out. She was wearing a white dress with a satin sash, her dark curls bouncing as she moved. She ran right past Brielle and wrapped her arms around Nolan's leg. Nolan's face transformed. The hardness vanished, replaced by a gentle, protective softness that Brielle remembered. But he wasn't looking at her. He placed his hand on the girl's head. Then, a woman stepped out from the crowd. She was stunning, but not in the polished Manhattan way Brielle was used to. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She moved with a quiet, lethal grace. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She walked straight to Nolan and the child. She placed a hand on Nolan's back. It wasn't a possessive claw like Preston's. It was a steadying anchor. She adjusted his tie with an ease that screamed intimacy. The kind of gesture born from thousands of mornings together, thousands of coffees shared, thousands of problems solved. Brielle felt like she had been slapped. The air left her lungs. "Nolan," Brielle said again, her voice sounding small and pathetic even to her own ears. "I don't understand. I thought you came back for me." Nolan finally looked at her. His expression was a mix of pity and frustration. "I didn't come back for you, Brielle. I came back for business." "But the song," Brielle stammered, tears hot on her cheeks. "You played our song." Nolan glanced down at the woman beside him, then back at Brielle. "I played it to say goodbye to the boy I used to be. That boy died in the fire, Brielle. You buried him a long time ago." The woman, Kiera, looked at Brielle. Her gaze wasn't unkind, but it was firm. She picked up the little girl. "We need to go, Nolan. The car is waiting." Brielle stood there, mascara running down her face, the glittering party lights harsh and unforgiving. She watched as Nolan put his arm around Kiera, shielding her and the child from the flashes of the cameras. The jealousy hit her like a knife in the gut. Not just because he was with someone else, but because they looked like a team, a unit, something she and Preston had never been, something she and Nolan were supposed to be. "Wait!" Brielle cried out, but her voice was lost in the wind. When Nolan finally spoke into the mic a moment later to clarify his exit, he said the words that would haunt her for years. "I played it to say goodbye to the boy I used to be. It wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning." Would you blame him for moving on? Or blame her for believing the fantasy that he came back just for her? Do you think Nolan still has feelings for Brielle, despite what he said? In less than 60 seconds, she lost a fiancé, a family, and the story she'd been telling herself for 10 years. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing Nolan, Kiera, and the child inside. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with judgment. Then the chaos started. Preston stormed past her without a word. He didn't even look at her. He was already on his phone, barking orders to his PR team to spin the narrative before the morning blogs went live. "She's unstable," she heard him say as he pushed through the glass doors. "Stress exhaustion. We'll issue a statement." Brielle turned to find her parents. Her mother was weeping into a silk handkerchief, but when Brielle took a step toward her, her mother turned her back. Her father was staring at the floor, shaking his head. He looked old, defeated. He didn't offer a hand. He just walked away, guiding her mother toward the stairs, leaving Brielle standing alone in the center of the terrace. The staff began to scramble. Waiters rushed to clear the spilled champagne. The DJ, looking terrified, started playing a generic pop song, but the volume was too low, making the whole scene feel surreal and grotesque. Guests were grabbing their coats, their eyes darting toward Brielle with a mix of pity and disgust. They didn't want to be near the blast zone. Brielle looked down at the spot where the ring had fallen. It was gone. A waiter had quietly pocketed it, or maybe Preston's security had swept it up. It didn't matter. She realized then that no one was coming. There was no white knight. There was no angry father coming to defend her honor. There was just her, shivering in a dress that cost more than most people made in a year, completely and utterly alone. A security guard approached her, his face carefully blank. "Ms. Sterling? It might be best if you used the service exit. The paparazzi are already swarming the front lobby." The service exit. Fitting. She was trash now. Brielle nodded, her neck stiff. She walked toward the heavy metal door marked exit, her heels dragging. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. Not pain, but a hollow ache. The numbness of shock was wearing off, replaced by the stinging clarity of what she had done. She had destroyed her future on a gamble, and the house had won. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the concrete stairwell. The air was cold and smelled of dust and old cleaning supplies. The heavy thud of the door closing behind her cut off the music and the whispers. Silence wrapped around her. She slid down the wall until she hit the concrete floor. She pulled her knees to her chest. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She closed her eyes, desperate to escape the image of Nolan walking away with another woman. As the darkness behind her eyelids took over, the story snapped back. The rooftop vanished. The expensive dress vanished. The Manhattan skyline melted away. She was 17 again. The air smelled of floor wax and vending machine coffee. And she was standing outside a cracked door in a forgotten community center in Ohio, listening to a boy play a piano like he was trying to break it. If your entire life plan vanished in one humiliating night, would you call it a tragedy or a second chance? Do you think Brielle's parents will ever forgive her? Or is this the end of their relationship? Years before the city lights, she was just the girl who stayed after choir to listen through a cracked door. The story didn't start in a Manhattan penthouse. It started in the humid hallway of the Dayton Community Center, a building that smelled of floor wax and stale popcorn. Brielle was 17 then, wearing a plaid school uniform skirt that she hated and carrying a backpack heavy with textbooks she hadn't opened. Her life back then was defined by what she had lost. Her brother had died 2 years prior, and her house had become a museum of grief. Her parents didn't talk much anymore. They just moved around each other like ghosts. So, Brielle started staying late after choir practice. She told her mother she was studying, but really, she was just avoiding the silence at home. That was how she found him. Nolan Hart wasn't a student at her prep school. He worked the lunch shift at the diner down the street and the evening shift mopping floors at the center. But around 8 p.m., when the janitor took his break, Nolan would sneak into the practice room. Brielle stood outside the door the first time she heard it. It was a messy, angry jazz riff that smoothed out into something surprisingly tender. She peeked through the crack in the door. Nolan was sitting there in his work uniform, a grease stain on his sleeve, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He played like he was fighting the piano, trying to wring something out of it. She must have leaned too hard on the door because it creaked open. Nolan stopped instantly. He spun around, his eyes wide and defensive. "I wasn't stealing anything," he said quickly, standing up. "Just playing." "I know," Brielle whispered, stepping inside. She should have left. Her mother would have been horrified that she was talking to the help, but she didn't leave. She walked toward the beat-up upright piano. "Don't stop." It sounded like how I feel. Nolan relaxed, a crooked grin appearing on his face. It was a mix of sarcasm and softness that made her chest feel tight. "And how do you feel, choir girl? Like you're trapped in a hymn?" "Something like that," she admitted. He sat back down and patted the empty space on the bench. "Sit. Let me show you what real music feels like. No sheet music. Just feeling." She sat. The bench was small, forcing their thighs to touch. The erotic tension wasn't sexual yet. It was innocent, but charged with a terrifying new awareness. She watched his forearms flex as his fingers danced over the keys. He smelled of dish soap and rain. When he reached over to guide her hand to a C major chord, his fingers brushed against her wrist, sending a jolt straight to her stomach. In that dusty room, with the faint buzz of vending machines in the hall, Brielle realized she wasn't just listening to music. She was waking up. Have you ever fallen for someone because of how they were when they thought nobody was watching? Do you think shared secrets are the strongest foundation for a relationship? He didn't say, "I love you." He composed it. It had been 3 months of secret meetings. 3 months of Brielle lying to her parents about extra credit projects, so she could spend 2 hours on a piano bench with a boy who had no money, no car, and no prospects, except for the genius in his hands. It was a sweltering July night. The air conditioning in the center was broken, so they had propped the window open with a hymn book. The sounds of crickets and distant traffic drifted in, mixing with the humidity. The only light came from the flickering red exit sign above the door and the moonlight spilling across the scuffed floor. "I have something for you," Nolan said. His voice was lower than usual. He seemed nervous, which was rare for him. He was usually the confident one, the one who made jokes about the rich kids at her school. "A song?" Brielle asked, leaning against the piano. "The song," he corrected. "I've been working on it. It's a promise. A vow." He began to play. It was the melody from the engagement party, the same haunting, beautiful sequence of notes that would eventually destroy her life. But here, in this room, it was pure. It started slow, hesitant, like two people afraid to touch, and then built into a sweeping, passionate declaration. Brielle watched him play. She saw the sweat on his brow, the intense focus in his dark eyes. He was pouring everything he couldn't say. His fear of being poor forever, his desire for her, his need to be someone worthy, into the keys. "It's called the Moonlit Vow," he said softly, not looking up from his hands. "Because I don't have a ring to give you, Brie. I don't have a house. But I have this. And this song is yours. Nobody else gets to hear it. It's the only thing I own that's just ours." The weight of it hit her. He was giving her his talent, his future. As the last note faded into the humid air, he finally looked at her. The silence was thick, heavy with the things teenagers feel but don't have words for. He leaned in. She could feel his breath, warm and fast, against her ear. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She curled her fingers into the fabric of his worn t-shirt, pulling him closer. It was an almost kiss. Their noses brushed. Their lips hovered millimeters apart. It was electric, terrifying, and perfect. She pulled away too fast, scared of the intensity, scared that if she kissed him, she would never be able to go back to her safe, planned life. "I love it," she whispered. "I love you," he didn't say, but the piano had said it for him. "What means more to you? A grand gesture in public, or a secret promise only the two of you share? Do you think a song can be a stronger commitment than a diamond ring?" Her parents didn't hate Nolan. They hated what he reminded them of. Dreams without safety nets. The bubble had to burst eventually. Brielle knew that. She just didn't expect it to happen over a Sunday roast. Her father was on his third scotch. Her mother was cutting her meat with surgical precision. The atmosphere was tight, vibrating with the unspoken stress of the family business. Their logistics company was bleeding money, though they tried to hide it behind new cars and country club memberships. "I saw you," her mother said, not looking up from her plate. "At the community center. With that boy from the diner. Brielle froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Mom, he's not just. He is a distraction. Brielle. Her father cut in, his voice booming. We are working ourselves to the bone to give you opportunities. To get you into a good college. To secure a future. And you're wasting time with a kid who scrubs floors. He's talented. Brielle argued, her voice shaking. It was the first time she had ever talked back. He's going to be a musician. He has big plans. Her father laughed. A harsh, dry sound. Plans don't pay the mortgage, Brielle. Stability pays the mortgage. Connections pay the mortgage. That boy is a dead end. He's a phase. That night, the argument escalated. They forbade her from seeing him. They talked about better opportunities and hinted that she needed to find a partner who could bring something to the table. They looked at Brielle not as a daughter, but as an investment that was depreciating. Brielle rebelled in the only way she knew how. She waited until the house was dark, until her father's snoring echoed from the master bedroom, and she crept out to the back porch. She dialed Nolan's number. He answered on the first ring. He was in his tiny room above the garage he rented, exhausted from a double shift. They know, she whispered into the phone, huddled in her oversized sweater. I figured. Nolan's voice was rough, tired, but warm. I saw your dad drive by the diner today. Looked like he wanted to run me over. They say you're holding me back, she said, tears stinging her eyes. Maybe I am, Nolan said quietly. There was a silence on the line that hurt more than the shouting. Don't say that, Brielle pleaded. The erotic tension shifted here. It wasn't about touch anymore. It was about the desperate, intimate need to be understood. You're the only one who sees me, Nolan. Not the good daughter. Just me. Then I have to do something, Nolan said, his voice hardening with resolve. I can't stay here, Bri. I can't be the guy who scrubs floors while you go off to college. I have to be someone. What do you mean? I mean I'm leaving Ohio. Have you ever been told someone wasn't good enough for you, only to feel like they were the only person who really saw you? Are Brielle's parents protecting her? Or are they just protecting their own social status? He promised he'd be back by Christmas. Neither of them knew Christmas would come with a phone call that sounded like a funeral. The Greyhound bus station was a place of misery. It smelled of diesel fumes, cheap coffee, and goodbyes. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rows of plastic seats. Nolan stood by the ticket counter, holding a duffel bag that contained everything he owned. He was going to West Texas. There was a construction boom there, he said. Dangerous work. High pay. He could save enough in 6 months to move to New York, to start a real life where he could produce his music. It's just 6 months, he told her, gripping her shoulders. His eyes were red-rimmed. He was terrified, though he tried to hide it. He was 19 years old, heading into the desert with nothing but grit. It feels like forever, Brielle cried, burying her face in his chest. She breathed him in soap, rain, and now the dust of the road. I'll write, he promised. I'll call every Sunday. I'll send you recordings. The loudspeaker crackled. Bus 402 to Midland, boarding now. This was it. The moment the movie usually cuts to black. But they didn't cut. They clung to each other. Nolan pulled her behind a concrete pillar, away from the prying eyes of the other passengers. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle like their first kiss. It was hungry. It was desperate. It was a kiss that tried to stop time, to brand his taste onto her lips so she wouldn't forget him while he was gone. He pressed her against the cold concrete, his body heat seeping into hers. For a moment, the bus station vanished. There was only the pressure of his mouth, the grip of his hands on her waist, the terrifying realization that she loved him more than she loved herself. Wait for me, he whispered against her lips. I will, she vowed. I promise. He pulled away, grabbed his bag, and walked toward the bus without looking back. If he had looked back, he might not have been able to leave. 3 weeks later, the phone rang. It wasn't Sunday. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Brielle picked it up, expecting to hear his voice. maybe a new melody he'd hummed into the receiver. Instead, a stranger's voice, clipped and professional, came on the line. "Is this Brielle Sterling? I'm calling from the Midland County Emergency Response. There had been an explosion at the work site. A gas line rupture. Massive fire. We have a John Doe," the voice said. "He had your number in his pocket. Would you follow someone you love across the country with no plan? Or let them go and trust they'll come back? Do you think Nolan was foolish to leave? Or was he doing the only thing he could to be worthy of her?" They never showed her a body, just a sentence. "He's probably gone." The days following the phone call were a blur of gray static. Brielle didn't remember eating. She didn't remember sleeping. She just remembered the words repeating in her head like a broken record. Burn unit. Critical condition. Unidentifiable. And then, the final update, we lost him. Or at least, that's what her parents told her. They took over everything. Her father spoke to the hospital. Her mother intercepted the mail. They told her the body was too badly damaged to be shipped home, that he had been cremated by the state because there was no next of kin. They told her there would be no funeral, just a quiet memorial service at their church. It was a casket with no one inside, just a polished wood box sitting at the front of the altar, surrounded by lilies that smelled too sweet. Brielle sat in the front pew, dressed in black, feeling absolutely nothing. She was hollowed out, a shell. She stared at the empty casket and tried to conjure up his face, but all she could see was the fire she imagined consuming him. "It's for the best, sweetheart," her mother whispered, squeezing her hand. "He was a troubled boy. It's a tragedy, but life goes on. Life goes on." The cruelty of that phrase almost made Brielle scream. They didn't give her time to mourn. Within a month, the sympathy cards were cleared off the kitchen table. Her phone sat silent on her nightstand, a useless brick of plastic now that his number would never light it up again. She would lie in bed at night, replaying their last moment at the bus station. The way his hand felt on the small of her back. The heat of his body. The intimacy they had almost shared but never fully crossed into. It haunted her, the ghost of a future that died before it began. 6 months later, her father came into the living room. He looked less stressed than usual. The business was stabilizing, thanks to a new merger on the horizon. "Brielle," he said, sitting down opposite her. He placed a photo on the coffee table. It was a picture of a man in a sharp suit, with blonde hair and a winning smile. "We need to look forward now. The Vallas are very interested in combining our families. Their son, Preston, has asked to meet you." "I can't," Brielle said, her voice dead. "I'm not ready." "Nolan is gone," her father said, his voice firm, lacking any real sympathy. He pushed the photo closer to her. "You can't mourn a ghost forever. You have a duty to this family. And Preston is a man with a future. A secure future." Brielle looked at the photo of Preston Vale. He looked perfect. He looked safe. He looked like a man who would never write her a song, but who would also never leave her to burn in a desert. "Okay," she whispered, letting the trap snap shut. "Do you believe you can truly move on from someone if you never get real closure? Do you suspect Brielle's parents are lying about Nolan's death? Or do they believe it too?" Her engagement was negotiated over balance sheets, not feelings. Preston Vale didn't court Brielle. He acquired her. Their first date was a dinner with their fathers present, where the conversation was about market shares and liabilities. Preston was charming in a rehearsed, polished way. He remembered what wine she liked, opened her doors, and complimented her dress. But his eyes were empty. There was no warmth, no curiosity. He looked at her like she was a valuable piece of art he was adding to his collection. The proposal came 6 months later. It wasn't on one knee in a romantic restaurant. It happened in her father's office. The signed merger documents sat on the mahogany desk between them. Her father was beaming, his face flushed with relief. Preston's father looked pleased, like a man who had just closed a successful deal. Preston opened a small velvet box. Inside was the 3-carat diamond. "Brielle," he said, his tone formal. "Our families believe a union between us would be mutually beneficial. I agree. I hope you will too. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Brielle looked from the ring to her father's expectant face. This was it. This was the moment she traded her grief for her family's security. Nolan was a ghost. Preston was real. Stability, she told herself, was a form of love. Maybe not the fiery, all-consuming love she'd known, but a steady, dependable kind. She could learn to live with it. She had to. Yes, she said. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. The next year was a slow, numbing performance. Preston was affectionate in public. He would place a hand on the small of her back at parties, his touch leaving her cold. He would kiss her temple for the cameras, his lips feeling like a stranger's. In private, he was mostly absent, consumed by work. Brielle filled her days with wedding planning, charity lunches, and smiling for social media. She built a wall around the memory of Nolan, brick by painful brick. She told herself the past was buried, that the choir girl from Ohio was gone. She almost believed it, until one rainy Tuesday afternoon, she was sitting alone in her immaculate apartment, half watching a business channel. A headline flashed across the bottom of the screen. Seattle tech billionaire Nolan Creed's new freight finance platform disrupts the industry. Brielle nearly dropped her teacup. The past wasn't buried. It was on national television. Would you marry for security if it meant rescuing your family, even if your heart wasn't in it? Do you think Brielle made the right choice by agreeing to marry Preston at that time? His face looked different. His eyes didn't. The name was different, Nolan Creed, not Nolan Hart. But the man on the screen was impossibly familiar. He was in a sharp, tailored suit, standing in front of a panoramic window overlooking a gray, rainy city. Seattle. He looked older, harder. The soft, boyish angles of his face had been replaced by a strong jaw and a weary tension around his mouth. A thin white scar cut through his left eyebrow. But his eyes, they were the same. Dark, intense, and holding a world of secrets. The anchor was gushing about him. Self-made billionaire. Survived a near-fatal industrial accident a decade ago. Built his empire from nothing. Brielle's hand flew to her mouth. She sank onto the sofa, her legs suddenly weak. The TV glowed on her face in the dark apartment. On the table beside her, her phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. A comment on a photo of her and Preston at a recent gala. The split screen of her two lives felt like a slap. Nolan Creed's company, Creed Logistics, is now a key investor in several East Coast finance firms. The anchor continued, including a significant stake in Vail Sterling Consolidated. Brielle's blood ran cold. Vail Sterling Consolidated, the name of the new company formed by her family's merger with Preston's. She grabbed the remote and rewound the segment. She watched it again, and again, her eyes glued to the screen. She saw the way he gripped a glass of water, his right hand scarred just as she remembered from the rooftop party. She saw the slight limp as he walked across the stage. It was him. 1,000 questions exploded in her mind. How? Why the new name? Why had he never contacted her? Had he forgotten her? Or did he just not care? That night, she showed the clip to her parents. Her mother paled. "It's a coincidence, darling," she said, her voice tight. "So many people have similar stories." Her father scoffed. "You're seeing ghosts, Brielle. The man is dead. This is some tech billionaire who happens to look a little like him. Now drop it. You have a wedding to plan." But Brielle couldn't drop it. The wall she had built around her heart had a crack in it, and the past was starting to seep through. The guilt was immediate and suffocating. She was engaged to Preston, but her pulse quickened at the sight of a man on TV. Her body was reacting before her brain could argue. She was betraying her fiancé with a memory. She muted the TV, her hand shaking. The anchor was smiling, wrapping up the segment. "And sources say Mr. Creed will be making a rare public appearance at a Manhattan investment gala next month. The engagement party. Her engagement party. Have you ever seen someone who reminded you so much of a lost love that your body reacted before your brain could argue? Do you think Brielle's parents are lying to protect her? Or are they genuinely trying to dismiss her fears?" The man behind her fiancé's empire was the boy she'd buried in her heart. The weeks leading up to the engagement party were torture. Brielle existed in a state of quiet panic, hidden beneath a flawless exterior of smiles and nods. One evening, Preston was getting ready for a dinner she was too sick to attend. He was adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, talking about work. "The board is on edge," he said, distracted. "This West Coast investor is playing hardball. Wants to see the family synergy in person before he commits to the next round of funding. That's why this party is so important." "This investor," Brielle said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's his name?" "Nolan Creed," Preston said without looking at her. "Never heard of him before 6 months ago, but he's got us by the throat. Owns a huge piece of the company already. He'll be at the party. You need to be charming, Brielle. Turn it on." Brielle felt the air leave the room. It was true. The ghost from the TV was coming. And he was coming for her. Or at least, he was coming to a party celebrating her union with another man. Her anxiety spiraled. She spent hours in fitting rooms, surrounded by stylists fussing over satin and silk, while she secretly scrolled through articles about Nolan Creed on her phone. She studied his photos, trying to match the scars to her memories, trying to reconcile the poor boy from the diner with the billionaire on the screen. The old erotic tension, the innocent charge she felt sitting next to him at the piano, came back as a guilty secret. Alone in the dressing room, she closed her eyes and remembered how he had once traced the outline of her collarbone with his fingertip while playing with the silver cross necklace she wore. She remembered the heat of his breath, the smell of his skin. The memories were so vivid they felt like a betrayal. Was he coming to stop the wedding? Was he coming to gloat? Or did he even remember her? Maybe he was just a businessman making a deal, and she was just a ghost from his past. Her parents dismissed her fears as pre-wedding jitters. Preston was too busy to notice her quiet dread. She was completely alone with this terrifying secret. The night of the party arrived. A cool breeze swept over the rooftop. Brielle stood beside Preston, smiling for photos, her stomach in knots. The city lights glittered below, but they looked like a cage. Then, the band's keyboard player threw his hands up in frustration. A staff member joked that the keyboard on this rooftop never seemed to work. The host stepped up to the microphone. "Is there a pianist in the house?" Brielle's palms began to sweat. Her heart started to hammer against her ribs. She scanned the crowd, her eyes darting through the shadows. And then she saw him, stepping out from the VIP section, walking toward the baby grand piano. Would you go through with a public engagement party if you suspected your first love might be in the room? What do you think Nolan's real motive is for attending the party? From across the rooftop, he saw the girl from Ohio in a designer gown, smiling like she was trapped. Nolan Creed adjusted his cufflinks, his scarred hands stiff in the cool night air. He hated these parties. He hated the fake smiles, the empty chatter, the men who measured worth in stock prices. He was only here because his lawyers insisted. He had to see the family synergy of the Vail Sterling merger for himself before wiring another $100 million into a company run by the father of the girl who had buried him. He caught her reflection in the glass railing before she saw him. Brielle Sterling. She looked expensive. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style he didn't recognize. The dress she wore probably cost more than his first car. She was standing next to Preston Vail, a man Nolan already despised from their conference calls. Preston had his arm wrapped around her, a look of smug ownership on his face. Brielle was smiling, but it wasn't her real smile. Nolan knew her real smile. It was the crooked, shy one that appeared when he played a wrong note. The smile was a mask. Her eyes, even from across the terrace, looked distant, trapped. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mix of old anger and an even older longing. For 10 years, he had told himself he hated her. He had clung to the story that she had abandoned him, moved on without a second thought while he was fighting for his life in a burn unit, his body a landscape of pain. He had used that anger as fuel. It had built his empire. But seeing her now, the anger felt less righteous, felt sad. He watched her through the crowd. He saw the way she flinched almost imperceptibly when Preston touched her. He saw the way her gaze drifted over the skyline, as if looking for an escape. This wasn't the vibrant, hopeful girl he had known. This was a polished, perfect stranger. When the band's keyboard failed, an idea, a terrible, reckless idea, took hold of him. He could just leave. He could walk away, approve the funding, and never see her again. It was the smart move, the safe move. But the boy from Ohio, the one he claimed was dead, was still alive somewhere inside him. And that boy was screaming. He saw the host ask for a pianist. He saw the momentary panic in Brielle's eyes. And he made a decision. It wasn't a business decision. It was a personal one. He was going to play the song. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe it was cruel. But she deserved to know he survived. And he deserved to see, just once, if there was anything left of the girl who used to listen through a cracked door. As his fingers, stiff and scarred, touched the cool ivory of the keys, he wasn't just performing. He was lighting a fuse he had spent a decade avoiding. Do you think it was selfish of him to play that song? Or did she deserve to know he survived? If you were Nolan, would you have confronted her privately instead of making a public scene? Parties end. Messes don't. The service stairwell was cold and silent. Brielle had no idea how long she sat there. Her expensive gown bunched up around her on the dusty concrete floor. 10 minutes? An hour? Eventually, the adrenaline wore off, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She stood up, her legs stiff, and pushed the door open a crack. The party was over. The rooftop was nearly empty, save for the cleaning crew sweeping up broken glass and confetti. She took the service elevator down to the ground floor and slipped out a side entrance, avoiding the pack of paparazzi still swarming the front lobby. The walk back to her apartment was a blur. The city lights, usually so beautiful, felt accusing tonight. Her apartment was cold and dark. The engagement dress pooled on the floor where she dropped it, a puddle of silk and broken promises. She kicked off her heels and walked to the window, staring out at the river. Her phone began to light up. A string of angry, incoherent text messages from Preston. "You humiliated me. You're unstable. My lawyers will be in touch." Then her mother. 10 missed calls. A voicemail that was just her mother weeping, begging her to call back, asking how she could do this to them. For the first time in her life, Brielle didn't answer. She didn't call back to apologize, to smooth things over, to be the good daughter. She just stood there, letting the voicemails pile up, and sat with her own feelings. It was a strange, new sensation. She replayed the night in her head. The shock on Preston's face. The horror in her mother's eyes. The way Nolan had looked at her with pity, not love. The little girl who called him Daddy. The woman who stood by his side, a silent testament to a life built without her. She had lost everything. Her fiancé, her family's security, her reputation. And for what? For a ghost who didn't want to be found. A fresh wave of humiliation washed over her. Then her phone buzzed again. It wasn't Preston. It wasn't her mother. It was a number she didn't recognize, with a Seattle area code. Her heart stopped. Her hand trembled as she slid her finger across the screen to answer. She held the phone to her ear, not daring to breathe. "Hello?" she whispered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, a voice she hadn't heard in 10 years. A voice that was rougher, deeper, but unmistakably his, said her name. "Brielle, after a public disaster like that, would you apologize and beg for forgiveness? Or go silent and let the dust settle? What do you think Nolan is going to say to her on the phone?" The first word he said was her name, like it still tasted the same. Hearing him say Brielle after a decade of silence was like a physical jolt. It wasn't the smooth, confident voice of Nolan Creed from the Business Channel. It was rougher, deeper, and held the faint echo of the boy she used to know. She sank onto her bed, the city lights of Manhattan a distant blur behind her. On the other end of the line, she imagined him in a sterile Seattle office, the rainy skyline behind him, a split screen of two worlds that never should have collided. "Nolan?" she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded genuinely tired. "I didn't mean for that, for the chaos. I shouldn't have played the song." The apology felt like a slap. He was sorry for the chaos, not for the 10 years of silence. The shock began to wear off, replaced by a hot, sharp anger. "Why are you alive?" she demanded, her voice gaining strength. "We had a memorial service for you. I mourned you. Why did you never call? Why did you let me think you were dead?" There was a long, charged silence on the line. She could hear him take a deep, ragged breath. The silence was filled with old ghosts. The memory of how his voice used to drop when they talked late at night. The sound of his breathing on the phone when they would fall asleep together, separated by miles but connected by a phone line. "It's complicated, Brielle," he finally said. "When I woke up in that hospital, I wasn't me. I was a John Doe for months. My face, my whole body was burned. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move." He paused, and Brielle felt a pang of guilt mixed with her anger. "I tried to find you," he continued, his voice low and strained. "I wrote letters. They were all returned to sender. I tried to call, but the number was disconnected. By the time I was well enough to really look for you, I heard you were engaged." "So you just gave up?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You built this whole new life, with a new name and a family, and you never thought to tell me you weren't a ghost? What was I supposed to do, Bree?" He shot back, a flash of the old Nolan, the defensive boy from the wrong side of the tracks. "Show up on your doorstep looking like a monster and tell you to leave your perfect life for me? I had nothing. I was nothing. You had me," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy with everything they had lost. "I used to fall asleep listening to you breathe on the phone," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur that made her stomach clench. It was a memory so private, so raw, that hearing it now felt both like a comfort and a wound. "I have to go," he said abruptly. "No, wait," Brielle said, desperate. "You can't just call after 10 years and hang up." "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. Before he hung up, he added one more thing, his voice low and serious. "There are things you don't know, Brielle, about that explosion, and about what your parents did afterward. Would you give someone like that a second chance at a conversation? Or hang up to protect yourself? Do you think Nolan is telling the whole truth? Or is he hiding something else? He didn't just survive the fire. He survived what came after." Nolan's last words hung in the air long after he hung up. "What your parents did afterward." The accusation planted a seed of doubt that began to sprout into a sickening suspicion. Brielle called him back. He didn't answer. She texted, "What did my parents do?" Minutes later, he replied with a single sentence. "Ask them about the lawyer they sent to Texas." The next time he called, a day later, he didn't apologize. He just started talking, and Brielle listened as he painted a picture of hell. He described months in a Texas burn unit, alone and anonymous. He spoke of excruciating pain, of skin grafts and surgeries, of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the scarred face staring back. "No visitors were allowed except hospital staff," he recounted, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "That was the rule for the unidentified burn ward. My nurse, Kiera, she was the only person who spoke to me like I was a human being. Kiera, the woman on the rooftop, the woman who looked at him with such steady strength." Brielle's stomach twisted with a complex knot of jealousy and gratitude. This woman had saved him when Brielle was mourning him. "She helped me," Nolan continued. "She read to me. She fought with the hospital administration for better care. When I could finally talk, she was the one who listened. When I could finally hold a pen, she was the one who brought me paper." He told her about the letters he wrote, addressed to her home in Dayton. "They all came back," he said. "Stamped, returned to sender. No longer at this address." "But we never moved," Brielle whispered. "I know," Nolan said grimly. Eventually, a lawyer showed up, a man from a firm in Ohio. He said he represented your family. He told me you had moved on, that you were engaged and that your family requested I sign a document agreeing to never contact you again. He said it was for your emotional stability. He offered me a check. $10,000. Brielle felt sick. A lawyer tied to her family's company. A blocked email account he later discovered. It was all starting to connect. I didn't take the money, Nolan said, his voice hardening. But I took the hint. I disappeared. I changed my name. I worked. I met a software genius who was building a logistics platform. I invested the small settlement I got from the construction company. And I used every bit of anger I felt toward you and your family to build something so big you'd never be able to ignore it. The story was horrifying. The image of Nolan, scarred and alone, being told she had replaced him, was almost too much to bear. The tender intimacy he must have shared with the nurse who stood by him, the first person to touch his scars without flinching, felt like a direct contrast to the memory of Brielle's own soft hands on his unmarked skin. This wasn't fate. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was engineered. What hurts more? Losing someone to tragedy, or realizing people you trusted may have lied about it? Who do you blame more in this situation? Nolan for staying away, or Brielle's parents for lying? For the first time in her life, she looked at her parents and saw strangers. Brielle drove the 2 hours from Manhattan to her parents' house in Connecticut without a plan. She just knew she had to see their faces when she asked the question. She found them in the dining room, a room that had witnessed countless stiff, silent meals. Old family photos smiled down from the walls. A gallery of a happy life that felt like a lie. Her mother was arranging flowers. Her father was reading the paper. They both looked up when she walked in, their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. Brielle, thank God. Her mother started. We've been so worried. Brielle didn't let her finish. Did you send a lawyer to Texas? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Her mother's hand froze over a vase of roses. Her father slowly lowered his newspaper. The look on his face was all the confirmation she needed. We were protecting you, her father said, his voice low and defensive. He stood up, taking on the posture of a man about to justify the unjustifiable. You were a wreck, a ghost of yourself. That boy was going to ruin your life. He had nothing to offer. His name is Nolan, Brielle said, her voice shaking with rage. And he had me, and I had him. You took that from us. We gave you a future, her mother cried, finally finding her voice. We were losing the company. The deal with the Valles was our only way out. Preston was a good match, a stable match. Nolan Hart was a painful memory. We helped you move on. Move on. Brielle laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. You buried him alive. You told me he was dead. You let me grieve for a man who was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. Alone. We filtered the information, her father admitted, refusing to meet her eyes. The hospital said he might not make it. When he did, he was damaged. We made a decision. It was the best one for you, for this family. The cold, calculated cruelty of it stole her breath. Her loyalty to her family, a value that had been drilled into her since birth, was colliding with a visceral need for her own truth, her own life. She looked at her parents, at their expensive clothes and their perfectly decorated home, and she saw strangers. Two people who would manipulate their own daughter's grief to secure a business deal. After the argument, which ended with her father shouting and her mother weeping, Brielle walked out. She sat in her car, her hands shaking. She pulled out her phone and texted Nolan. What would you have done if I'd found you in that hospital? His reply came back almost instantly, a single sentence charged with a decade of everything they never got to explore. I would have asked you to stay. As she started the car, her father's final words echoed in her ears. If you keep digging into this, you'll lose more than just us. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a threat. Could you forgive parents who lied to control your future, even if they believed they were helping? Do you think her parents' actions were evil? Or were they just desperate people making a terrible choice? Love wasn't the only thing that exploded that night, the merger did too. The fallout from the engagement party was swift and brutal. Preston Vale, humiliated and furious, didn't just break the engagement. His family pulled out of the merger entirely. The Vale Sterling Consolidated Company, which had existed on paper for less than a year, imploded. Stock in her family's original company, Sterling Logistics, plummeted. Investors got nervous. Creditors started calling again. The financial ruin her parents had sacrificed her to avoid was now happening anyway. And this time it was because of her. The irony was not lost on Brielle. She found herself in a place she never expected to be. A boardroom. Her father, humbled and desperate, had no choice but to let her in. The company's biggest remaining investor, the one whose stake had grown even more powerful after the Vallas pulled out, was Nolan Creed. He now held their future in his scarred right hand. Brielle spent her days on conference calls, listening to lawyers and accountants debate the fate of her family's legacy. She was no longer just the pretty daughter. She was a variable in a complex equation. And she started to assert herself. She asked questions. She challenged assumptions. She refused to be shut out of the conversations that would decide her future. The most critical meetings were late-night video calls with Seattle. Just her father, and Nolan. On the screen, Nolan looked tired, his collar unbuttoned, the city lights glittering behind him. He was all business, his tone sharp and clinical. But sometimes, when her father was distracted by a document, Nolan's gaze would soften. Their talk would drift from contracts to old memories, disguised as business metaphors. "We need a partner we can trust," Nolan said once, looking directly at Brielle through the screen. "Someone who isn't afraid of a difficult road." Brielle felt the familiar pull, the charged history that arced between them even across thousands of miles. Was he using his leverage to get closer to her? Was she using their connection to save her family's company? The lines were blurry, and the stakes were impossibly high. One night, after a particularly grueling call, her father left the room, defeated. It was just her and Nolan on the screen. "This is a mess," she said, running a hand through her hair. "I can fix it," Nolan said. "But not from here. And not with your father making the decisions." He paused, his expression serious. "I'm making you an offer, Brielle. Not your father. You. Come to Seattle. Work with me directly at my headquarters for 6 months. Learn the business from the inside. After that, no one will ever decide your future for you again." It was a lifeline. It was also a trap. Going to Seattle meant facing him, facing Kiera, facing the life he had built without her. But staying meant suffocating under the weight of her parents' failure. She had to choose. Would you use a romantic connection to influence a business deal if it meant saving your family's livelihood? Is Nolan's offer a genuine opportunity, or a way to control her? This time, she was the one getting on the plane. The decision was surprisingly easy. It was the first truly independent choice Brielle had made in her entire adult life, and the feeling was a potent mix of terror and exhilaration. She booked a one-way ticket to Seattle. Her parents were devastated. Her mother saw it as a betrayal, accusing her of running after the man who ruined us. Her father saw it as a desperate, foolish business move, but he was too broken to fight her. He just nodded and told her not to lose the company. The online gossip was brutal. Blog posts and tabloid articles painted her as a desperate gold digger, chasing the billionaire who had publicly rejected her. The narrative Preston's PR team had spun, that she was unstable, stuck. She was the crazy ex-fiancée, and Nolan was the powerful man trying to escape her. Brielle ignored it all. She packed 2 suitcases, sublet her apartment, and took a taxi to JFK. At the airport terminal, holding the paper ticket in her hand, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The last time she had been in a place like this, she was the one being left behind. She was the one crying, promising to wait. Now she was the one getting on the plane. She was the one leaving everything behind for a chance at something real. As the plane lifted off, she watched the Manhattan skyline shrink beneath her until it was just a glittering memory. She wasn't running away from a problem. She was running toward a solution, or at least toward the truth. The flight was 5 hours of churning anxiety and tingling anticipation. She spent the entire time thinking about what she would say, how she would act. She had to be professional. This was a job. This was about saving her family's company. But under the surface, her heart pounded with a different kind of hope. The thought of being in Nolan's world, of seeing him day to day, of breathing the same air, was a pull she couldn't ignore. She told herself it was just nostalgia, a dangerous echo of the past. But she knew it was more than that. When the plane landed in Seattle, the gray, drizzly sky felt like a reflection of her own uncertain future. She took a car to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Creed Logistics. Nolan's office was on the top floor. The elevator ride felt like an ascent into another world. When the doors opened, she stepped into a sleek, minimalist reception area with a panoramic view of the city and the bay. A woman at the front desk directed her to Nolan's office. The door was a heavy slab of frosted glass. Brielle took a deep breath, smoothed down her blouse, and pushed it open. Nolan was standing by the window, his back to her. But he wasn't alone. Sitting in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk, calm and composed, was Kiera. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes, when they met Brielle's, were wary but unblinking. She was waiting. Have you ever left everything you knew behind for a chance to rewrite your life? What do you think Kiera's first words to Brielle will be? One loved him first. One loved him through the fire. The office felt like a battlefield, though no one had fired a shot yet. Brielle stood just inside the doorway, her suitcase still by her feet. Nolan turned from the window, his expression carefully neutral. Kiera remained seated, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp and assessing. Brielle, Nolan said, his voice even. This is Kiera, my partner. The word hung in the air, deliberately vague. Business partner? Life partner? Both? Kiera stood, extending a hand. She was tall, nearly Brielle's height, with dark skin and natural hair pulled back in a professional twist. Her handshake was firm, her palm warm and dry. I've heard a lot about you, she said. Her tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of someone who had already decided how this conversation would go. I'm here to work, Brielle said, trying to keep her voice steady. Nolan offered me a position. I intend to earn it. Good, Kiera said, releasing her hand. Because if you're here for some other reason, we need to know now. This isn't a reunion tour. This is a business. Nolan shifted uncomfortably. Kiera. No. Kiera cut him off, her voice calm but unyielding. She looked at Brielle. I'm not the villain in your love story. I'm the woman who sat by his bed when he couldn't move. I read to him when he couldn't see. I fought insurance companies and hospital administrators when he couldn't speak. So if you're here because you think you can pick up where you left off, you need to leave. Now. The words should have felt like an attack. But they didn't. They felt like truth. Brielle looked at Kiera and saw depth. A woman who wasn't a saint or a villain. Just someone who had made her own choices and lived with them. I'm not here to take anything from you, Brielle said quietly. I'm here because I need to learn how to stand on my own. If that means working side by side with both of you, then that's what I'll do. Kiera studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll see. The first few weeks were tense. Brielle threw herself into work, learning the freight finance platform from the ground up. She sat in on meetings, took notes, asked questions. Nolan was professional, distant, treating her like any other junior employee. It hurt, but she understood it. He was protecting himself. Or maybe he was protecting Kiera. One evening, Brielle stayed late, poring over shipping contracts in a conference room. She heard laughter from down the hall. She stood, stretching her stiff neck, and walked toward the sound. Nolan's office door was half open. Through the gap, she saw Kiera leaning against his desk, her hand on his shoulder. Nolan looked up at her and smiled. A real smile, warm and unguarded. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. The gesture so tender it made Brielle's chest ache. She felt the conflicting rush of longing and guilt. She wanted to be happy for them. She wanted to hate them. Mostly, she just wanted to stop hurting. Kiera pulled Brielle aside that night as they were leaving. If you're staying, she said, her voice quiet but firm. We need to be clear about what you really want from him. Brielle met her gaze. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I'm trying to figure it out. Who has the stronger claim? The first love, or the one who helped rebuild a broken life? Do you think Kiera is being fair? Or is she being too harsh on Brielle? Desire doesn't care about job descriptions. Working late became a routine. The office building emptied out around 7 p.m., leaving just a skeleton crew of security guards and the occasional workaholic executive. Brielle and Nolan found themselves in the same conference room more nights than not, reviewing contracts and refining proposals for the Sterling Logistics Rescue Plan. The physical closeness was unavoidable. They leaned over the same documents, reaching for the same folders. Their hands brushed, their shoulders touched. The reflection in the window showed them standing too close, two silhouettes against the city lights. One night, they were hunched over a laptop, reviewing a budget spreadsheet. Nolan pointed to a line item, his finger hovering over the screen. Brielle leaned in to see, her hair falling forward. He turned his head at the same moment, and suddenly they were inches apart, breath mingling, the space between them charged with a decade of unspoken words. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Brielle's pulse hammered in her throat. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between memory and loyalty, between the girl he had loved and the woman who had saved him. He pulled back first, clearing his throat. We should call it a night, he said, his voice rough. Brielle nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The next day, Kiera invited Brielle to dinner. Not a casual coffee, a formal dinner at a nice restaurant. The three of us, Kiera said. No pretending, just honesty. Brielle agreed, though dread pooled in her stomach. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where conversations were muffled by thick carpets and soft jazz. They sat at a corner table, the city lights twinkling outside like distant stars. The food arrived, but none of them ate much. The napkins on the table became twisted, nervous props in their hands. I need to know what this is, Kiera said, looking between them, because I can feel it, the tension, the history, and I won't be the woman who pretends it doesn't exist. Nolan shifted in his seat. Kiera, let me finish, she said gently. She turned to Brielle. I know you loved him. I know he loved you. But I need to know. Are you here to build a career? Or are you here to get him back? Brielle felt the weight of the question. It forced her to articulate something she hadn't fully admitted to herself. I don't know if I'm here to get him back, she said slowly. I'm here because I need to prove I can be something more than someone's daughter or someone's fiancé. If that means working alongside Nolan, then that's what I'll do. But I can't promise I don't feel anything. Nolan looked at her, his expression pained. Then he turned to Kiera. I love you, he said. You know that. But I'd be lying if I said Brielle didn't still affect me. Kiera nodded, as if she had expected this. I know, she said. I've always known. Then Kiera asked the question that changed everything. She looked at both of them, her voice calm but relentless. If there had been no lie about that fire, where would you two be right now? Is it possible to stay, just colleagues with someone you once planned a whole future with? Do you think Nolan is being unfair to Kiera by admitting he still has feelings for Brielle? Some truths hurt more than betrayal because they rewrite who you are. The silence after Kiera's question was deafening. Brielle stared at her half-eaten food, her mind racing. If there had been no lie, no fire, no decade of separation, where would they be? I don't know, Nolan finally said, his voice low. Maybe we would have made it. Maybe we would have burned out on our own. We were kids, Kiera. Broke, desperate kids with big dreams and no plan. But you loved her, Kiera pressed, not letting him off the hook. Yes, Nolan admitted, and the word landed like a bomb. I did. I probably still do in some way. But that doesn't mean it was meant to last. And it doesn't mean what I have with you isn't real. Kiera's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. I already knew, she said quietly. I've known since the night you played that song. I just needed to hear you say it. Brielle felt a tear slide down her cheek. Not because she was losing him, she had lost him years ago, but because the truth was rewriting everything she thought she knew. She had spent 10 years mourning a fantasy. The boy she loved had grown into a man she didn't fully know. And the woman sitting across from her wasn't the enemy. She was just another person trying to navigate an impossible situation. "I'm sorry," Brielle whispered. "I never meant to come between you." "You didn't," Kiera said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Life did. Lies did. But we're all here now, and we get to decide what happens next." Nolan looked between them, his scarred hand resting on the table. "I don't want to hurt either of you," he said, "but I don't know how to move forward without hurting someone." Brielle wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "Then maybe this isn't about you," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Maybe this is about me choosing myself for once. I came here to learn, to grow, not to win you back, Nolan, not to steal you from Kiera. I came here to stop being a ghost." The words surprised even her. But as she said them, she realized they were true. This story never really began or ended with a man. It began with a girl who lost herself in grief, and it would end with a woman who finally found her own voice. Nolan reached over and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the touch so brief and gentle it felt like goodbye. Then he pulled back, his hand returning to Kiera's. They left the restaurant separately. Brielle stood on the sidewalk, the cold Seattle air biting at her cheeks. She looked up at the sky, overcast and starless, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't waiting for someone to rescue her. She was ready to rescue herself. Could you stay with someone who admitted they still loved a person from their past, even if they chose you in the present? Do you think Brielle's realization is the turning point of her story? She went back to the scene of her humiliation, not to beg, but to reclaim it. A year passed. 12 months of grueling work, late nights, early mornings, and slow, steady growth. Brielle learned the logistics business inside and out. She negotiated contracts, built relationships with investors, and eventually pitched her own initiative, a program to support small businesses trying to break into the supply chain industry. Nolan backed it. Kiera helped design it. And together, they turned Sterling Logistics from a dying company into a viable, restructured operation. Her parents, humbled and grateful, stepped back from day-to-day operations, finally giving Brielle the space to lead. When the invitation arrived for a charity gala on the same Manhattan rooftop where her life had shattered, Brielle didn't hesitate. She RSVP'd yes. The night of the event, she stood by the glass railing, looking out at the familiar skyline. The same glittering lights, the same champagne, the same piano in the center of the terrace. But the woman standing there was different. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair down in natural waves. No ring on her finger, no man on her arm, just her standing tall and unafraid. Her parents arrived, looking older and quieter. Her father approached her, his hand extended. "I'm proud of you," he said, and for once, it sounded like he meant it. "Thank you," she replied, shaking his hand. She didn't need his approval anymore, but it was nice to have it. Then Nolan arrived. He was late, his tie loosened, his expression tired but warm. Kiera was beside him, and their daughter, now 7 years old, skipped ahead, excited by the lights. When Nolan's eyes found Brielle across the terrace, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of longing or regret. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with the past. He walked over, Kiera's hand in his. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Brielle corrected. They talked for a while, easy and natural. No tension. No unfinished business. Just 3 people who had survived a storm and come out stronger on the other side. Then, as if on cue, the band's keyboard failed. The host, laughing nervously, made the same joke. "Is there a pianist in the house?" All eyes turned to the piano. But this time, no one looked at Nolan. They looked at Brielle. Have you ever walked back into a place that once broke you, just to prove to yourself you'd healed? What do you think Brielle is going to play? She thought The Moonlit Vow was about a boy and a girl. It turned out to be about the promise she finally made to herself. Brielle walked to the piano, her heart steady, her steps sure. The crowd parted for her, whispers following in her wake. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. She took a breath and began to play. It was The Moonlit Vow. But it wasn't the same haunting, mournful version Nolan had played a year ago. This was different. She had rearranged it, added jazz chords, shifted the rhythm, made it brighter, more hopeful. It still carried the weight of memory, but now it also carried the lightness of freedom. She played with confidence, her ringless hand catching the gala lights. She didn't look at Nolan, though she could feel him watching. She played for herself, for the 17-year-old girl who fell in love in a dusty community center, for the woman who lost herself in grief, and for the woman she had become. When the final note faded, the rooftop was silent for a beat. Then, applause erupted. People stood, clapping, some wiping their eyes. Brielle rose from the bench, her chest tight with emotion. Nolan approached her as the crowd dispersed. Kiera and their daughter were nearby, swaying gently to the ambient music that had started up again. He leaned close, his breath warm at her ear. "You finally made it your own," he whispered. Brielle smiled, a small, knowing smile. She wasn't his anymore. She wasn't anyone's but her own. "Yeah," she said. "I did." He stepped back, rejoining his family. Brielle watched them for a moment. Nolan, Kiera, their daughter, a unit whole and real. She felt no jealousy, no regret, just peace. Her mother approached, cautiously, and wrapped her arms around Brielle. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." "I know," Brielle said, holding her. "I'm working on forgiving you." As the night wound down, Brielle stood by the railing one last time, looking out at the city. She thought about that night a year ago, when she had stood in this exact spot, holding a microphone and a shattered dream. She had lost everything that night: her fiancé, her family's respect, the life she thought she wanted. But she had gained something far more powerful, herself. And that, my friends, is the end of Brielle's story. But I need to hear from you in the comments right now. Seriously, don't just scroll past this. Tell me, was the night she lost everything on that rooftop a punishment? Or was it the beginning of her real story? And be honest. If you were in her place, would you have walked away like she did? Or would you have fought to get Nolan back? I'm reading every single reply, so let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this series, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you never miss the next story. I'll leave you with this. He had once walked away while she was still holding the ring. Years later, she left this rooftop holding something far more powerful. Her own life, finally chosen on purpose.